Sooner is better than later.
And if you're going to lend your money to someone that is considered very risky, that's on an unsustainable path, you would want a higher interest rate for giving them your money. That means the more money we print and the more treasury bonds we create, the US has to incentivize investors with higher and higher rates, and that will cost the country more and more in interest. It's the infinite feedback loop. That's one of the reasons why President Trump wants to lower interest rates so the US could refinance at a more reasonable level. Now, if companies and banks can print unlimited amounts of money and the US has so much debt, then couldn't we just change the system and vote the right people into power and just make it all better? Turns out, that's really hard to do. And nowhere is that becoming more clear than politics. In 2024, for example, 100 billionaire families spent a record $2.6 billion in federal races, about 1/6 of total spending. The top 50 individual donors gave out $2.5 billion, with Republican-leaning contributions outpacing Democrats about 2-1. If you remember, Elon Musk was actually a big part of that, and he donated hundreds of millions of dollars, mostly to President Trump's causes. But there's also Miriam Adelson, who gave out over $100 million in 2024, and she's one of the GOP's biggest donors. There's also Timothy Mellon, who gave out $197 million to elections, almost all to Republican-led super PACs. Add $1.9 billion in estimated dark money spending by nonprofits and shell groups that conceal their donors, and you get the idea. But it's also the same story on the Democrat side. George Soros' super PACs spent a ton of money. His Open Society foundations spent at least $140 million into organizations in 2021, on top of more than $170 million he contributed personally during the 2022 midterms. And in the 2024 cycle, the Soros family-funded groups like the Texas Organizing Project got $600 grand, and state Democratic parties in Wisconsin and Ohio got $250,000 each from Soros-affiliated entities. Now this rabbit hole goes so deep, but for the purpose of this video, the point here is that the system spends a huge amount of money to influence who runs for politics, how things are the way they are, and who the winners and losers ultimately get to be. But all this sort of brings me back to the original question of who controls and owns the country. And I think the answer is, it depends on what you value. Some people, for example, don't value money. They value political control. Some people value social control and the ability to say things that they want without a consequence. There's a lot of levels to this, and there's no one entity that controls all of it. So what do you value? For me, the thing I value most is my economic energy. Like this bill right here, it represents a small part of my energy. I converted my time into skills and my time and skills into this, right? It's another form of energy. And I can also convert it into something else, like food or shelter. But unfortunately, someone controls this form of energy already because they have a magic button that they can just press, which zaps this energy away from me. Now I can't actually see it vanishing, but I feel it when I go shopping. And I realize that the time I spent to get this buys me less of the things I want. And that's what rich people kind of figured out, the solution to that problem. And it's called a store of value. They figured out that if they can convert that form of energy into something else, like stocks, real estate, or art, they can keep more of their economic energy for themselves for longer. Now, some of the most efficient forms of energy they found are things like stocks, beachfront property, gold, and art. And that's why those assets have what's called a premium. A premium is to pay more than what something might be worth. But think about it. Why is there a premium? At the end of the day, a house is a house, a car is a car, a thing is a thing. There's no real reason from a utility perspective why one house should be worth the average and another worth millions and millions, except for its ability to hold and store value. That's the primary reason there's a premium. Rich people are happy to pay more for those things than they are intrinsically worth, because those things store their economic energy more efficiently. How special is that thing beyond its utility, and how desirable will it be to others in the future? that desirability is tied through the lens of economic energy. And that's the quadrillion-dollar question. Which one of them is the best for that? I promise you, I don't want this to be a Bitcoin pitch video, but I'm gonna leave you with this. It's a tweet I saw from Tad Smith, and it might open up your mind to an idea. In 2017, a famous Basquiat painting sold for $110.5 million. It was the most expensive Basquiat painting sold at the time. Bitcoin was worth about $2,000 a coin, which meant the buyer could have spent 55,000 Bitcoins to buy this painting. But fast forward to July 2025, and Bitcoin is now $117,000. That same $110 million painting would only need 941 Bitcoins. Now in dollar terms, that painting went up in value. It preserved its economic energy. Awesome. But if you measured it against a different economic energy, Bitcoin, then you'd actually realize the painting lost 98% of its value. Now the same is true of real estate. What was the average cost of a house a couple years ago? How many Bitcoins did it take to buy one? From 2016 to 2024, the average house went up over 50% relative to dollars. That's insane. It preserved economic energy. Awesome. But relative to Bitcoin, it lost 99%. In fact, from 2020 to 2025, the average house again lost over 80% of its value. Bitcoin is draining all of the premium out of those assets, and it is sucking it up as more and more money realizes that this specific form of energy is superior for the purpose of protecting economic energy. And that's why every asset class will continue to depreciate when measured against it. And as more and more money understands those benefits, it will continue to tell that same story. What those benefits are, though, I'm going to leave it up to you to study. Bitcoin's not for everyone, and I get that, but if you value preserving the value of your time, then you might want to read into it. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Smash the like button, subscribe if you haven't already. I'd love to see you back here next week, and I'd love to get your thoughts. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.